Found my brother and fiance together in my bed 2 months before our wedding. They got married when she got pregnant, but now he abandoned her and my parents want me to support her. 3 years ago, I was engaged to a woman, I'll call her Lila. At that time, I genuinely believed she was the love of my life. Lila and I had been together for nearly 5 years, and our relationship felt solid. We were both lawyers, which meant we led demanding, fast-paced lives, but we always made sure to prioritize each other when we had free time. The year I proposed to Lila was supposed to be the happiest year of our lives. But that same year, something unexpected happened. She lost her job. The loss came after she was found breaking some company rules. I won't go into the specifics of what happened because it's personal, but what I will say is that the company let her go pretty unceremoniously after what she did to them. Now, if you've ever known an overachieving workaholic, you might understand how such a loss can shake them to their core. Work wasn't just a job for Lila, it was part of her identity, her pride, and her purpose. Losing it so abruptly left her reeling. Lila threw herself into the job hunt almost immediately, applying to countless firms and corporations. Unfortunately, her field was highly specialized, and opportunities weren't exactly easy to come by, especially after the circumstances of her dismissal. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and she still hadn't secured a new position. Through all of this, I tried to be as supportive as I could. I assured her that she didn't need to worry about finances. We were engaged, after all, and I saw it as my responsibility to take care of her during this rough patch. Knowing Lila's tendency to obsess over things and stress herself out, I urged her to relax and not let the situation consume her. To my relief, she took my advice, or at least she tried to. With her newfound free time, she decided to pursue something that had always been a dream of hers, learning pottery. She enrolled in a local pottery class and began dedicating her spare hours to this new hobby. This was also the same pottery class that my brother, Mason, went to. Let me tell you a bit about Mason. He's the complete opposite of me. While I was the responsible, nerdy one growing up who focused on my studies and career, Mason was the quintessential troublemaker. He spent his school days goofing off, getting into mischief, and earning himself a reputation as a carefree playboy. That reputation followed him into college and beyond. He was the kind of guy who never stayed with a girl for long and rarely took anything seriously. Lila had met Mason early in our relationship and knew the kind of person he was. So, when she started going to the same pottery class as Mason, I thought their paths crossing there was just a coincidence. But looking back, that was when things began to shift. In the span of just a few weeks, the two of them became surprisingly close. At first, I didn't think much of it. Mason offered to pick her up and drop her off at class sometimes, which seemed thoughtful, though unusual. Lila would come home and excitedly tell me stories about what she and Mason had done at pottery class or show me the pieces they had worked on. But then their interactions extended beyond pottery. They began hanging out on weekends, doing things like visiting art museums or checking out new restaurants. These were activities that Lila and I would typically enjoy together, but now she was doing them with Mason instead. As time went on, I couldn't ignore the changes in Lila's behavior. She was spending far more time with Mason than I was comfortable with, and it was starting to affect our relationship. She even began skipping date nights with me to hang out with him. I'm not the type to sit quietly and let things fester, so one evening, I confronted her directly. I asked her point blank if there was something going on between her and Mason. Lila was taken aback by my question, offended, even. She flat out denied that anything inappropriate was happening and insisted that her time with Mason was purely platonic. She explained that spending time with him was fun and lighthearted, comparing it to hanging out with a younger brother. She seemed genuinely hurt that I'd even suggest something more was going on, and for a moment, I felt guilty for doubting her. But deep down, her reassurances didn't completely ease my mind. Things came to a head just 2 months before our wedding. I was working tirelessly at that point, juggling an intense workload to make sure everything was in place financially. Ever since Lila had lost her job, I'd taken on the full financial responsibility of our home and all the expenses for our upcoming wedding. She hadn't found new work yet, and while she used some of her savings for her personal needs or emergencies, I was shouldering most of the burden. Between paying for everything and the stress of planning a wedding, my hours at the office had grown longer and more grueling. I wasn't around as much as I should have been, and looking back, maybe that gave Lila and Mason the opportunity to get as close as they did. One evening, I came home early from a business trip. I was looking forward to surprising Lila and spending some quality time with her. As I pulled into the driveway, I immediately noticed my brother's car parked outside. Normally, I wouldn't have thought much of it. Mason had a habit of dropping by unannounced. But this time was different. It was already past 9 p.m., and seeing his car there so late raised a red flag. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside quietly, I could already hear faint laughter coming from within the house. The living room was empty, but the TV was on, its flickering light casting shadows across the room. My eyes were immediately drawn to the beer cans scattered across the floor and then, to the unmistakable sight of Lila's clothes and undergarments lying haphazardly among them. My stomach dropped. I knew, in that instant, what I was about to walk into. A part of me wanted to turn around and leave, but another part, the part that needed undeniable proof, pushed me forward. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I walked slowly, my heart pounding as I made my way toward the bedroom. I reached the doorway and stopped. There they were, Lila and Mason, tangled together in the most intimate way imaginable. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't even notice me standing there. Normally, I'm a calm and collected person, but this was a betrayal of the highest order. My fiancée, the woman I was supposed to marry in just 2 months, was in my bed with my own brother. Without saying a word, I stepped into the room, walked up to the bed, and grabbed Mason by the back of his neck. I yanked his face away from Lila's, and the shock on his face was almost satisfying. He turned to look at me, and his expression shifted instantly from confusion to terror. I didn't even look at Lila. Mason stumbled, immediately mumbling apologies at me. But his words meant nothing to me at that moment. I punched him square in the nose. The sickening crunch of bone gave me grim satisfaction as blood began to pour down his face. He cried out in pain, but I wasn't done. I hit him again. And again. Each punch landed harder than the last. Blood dripped down his nose and onto his shirt, but I didn't care. He stumbled backward, his hands weakly trying to block me, but I kept going. After Mason was on the floor, bloodied and crying for mercy, I turned my attention to Lila. She sat on the bed, trembling and sobbing. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, my voice cold and measured, that she had 10 minutes to get out of my house. If she didn't, I told her, I wouldn't hesitate to reduce her to the same bloody mess as my brother. She started pleading with me, apologizing over and over. She said she could explain, and begged me not to kick her out, to give her a chance to fix things. But I wasn't interested in her excuses or apologies. I glanced at my watch and said flatly, you've got 9 minutes left. The tone of my voice and the look in my eyes must have told her I wasn't bluffing because she scrambled off the bed and began getting dressed with shaking hands. Tears streaked her face as she grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started packing whatever she could fit into it. When she was finally done packing, dragging her half-filled suitcase down the stairway, she turned to me one last time. Her voice was broken as she begged me to listen, claiming that she loved me and that she deserved a chance to explain herself. Without a word, I reached for her hand, slid my engagement ring off her finger, and pushed her toward the door. She tried to resist, pleading with me to reconsider, but I was done. I opened the door and shoved her out into the night. She stumbled onto the porch, still crying and yelling for forgiveness. I didn't even look back as I slammed the door shut in her face, her sobs muffled on the other side. Mason's face was still bloodied from our altercation, and though I was still seething with rage, I didn't want to be responsible for something worse happening to him. I called my parents and told them everything that had happened. My dad was furious at Mason, and my mom was shocked, but they both said they'd come over immediately. When they arrived, my mom, being a nurse, took charge of Mason's injuries. She cleaned and dressed his wounds, which, fortunately for him, were mostly superficial. Meanwhile, my dad pulled me out to the backyard, away from Mason. He could see that my hands were still shaking with anger, and I was barely holding it together. A little while later, Mason came outside with my mom. His face was bruised, his nose bandaged, and there were still traces of blood on his shirt. He apologized for betraying me, claiming that he hadn't meant for things to happen this way. But then he dropped the bombshell. He said that he was in love with Lila. I finally turned to face him, my eyes like daggers. He kept going, explaining how he believed Lila felt the same way for him as well. He claimed that this was the first time they'd slept together, as if that somehow made it better. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me their messages, conversations full of flirty texts, secrets, and Lila confessing how unhappy she was in our relationship. According to Mason, she was the one who had invited him over to stay with her that night since she thought I would still be on my work trip. As I stood there, reading those messages, my rage boiled over again. Mason kept talking, telling me how he was sorry for betraying me, but also insisting that he'd never felt this way about anyone before. He said he couldn't stop himself and begged me to forgive him. His words felt like daggers twisting in the wound. My dad, who had been listening quietly, finally had enough. He scolded Mason harshly, telling him how deeply he had wronged me and how ashamed he should be of himself. But my mom's reaction was different. Mason had always been her favorite, and I could see her struggling with the situation. Mom started to tell me that, Regardless of what I decided to do about Lila, I needed to forgive my brother. She said he seemed genuinely remorseful, as if that somehow lessened the betrayal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I cut her off and told my parents that I wasn't in the mood for lectures or advice. The only thing I wanted at that moment was for them to take Mason and leave. I couldn't bear to look at him any longer. My dad nodded, understanding that I needed space, and he helped Mason to the car. My mom hesitated, clearly wanting to stay and mediate, but eventually, she followed. In the weeks that followed, I was still grappling with the emotional fallout of Lila's betrayal. Lila had been texting me persistently over the weeks, begging for forgiveness and trying to explain herself, but her explanations always circled back to the same tired excuses that were pretty similar to what Mason had already told me. She claimed that she and Mason had never meant to hurt me. I had pretty much ignored her messages all those weeks. Then, out of nowhere, I received a phone call from Mason. He informed me that he and Lila had just found out that she was pregnant. And the baby was his. He told me that since she was carrying his child, he wanted to marry her and wanted my blessing. I couldn't believe the audacity he had to ask me this after the way they both had betrayed me. My mother's reaction only made everything worse. She had already been trying to play peacemaker between Mason and me, but now she seemed to view Lila's pregnancy as some kind of divine intervention. She told me it was God's plan for Lila to get pregnant like that, and that maybe Mason and Lila were always meant to be. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. It was as if she was trying to justify the unimaginable, to excuse what they had done because it fit into her newfound fantasy of becoming a grandmother. I told my mother outright that I knew exactly what she was doing, and that if she chose to side with Mason and Lila, our relationship was over. I wasn't bluffing either. The betrayal by my brother was bad enough, but to have my own mother align herself with them was something I couldn't accept. My father tried to stay neutral, perhaps thinking it would help diffuse the tension. Anyways, my mother offered Lila financial support, assuring her that she and the baby would be well taken care of. But, of course, there was a catch. My mother insisted that she and Mason had to get married. After all, this was what Mason desired also. Mom was relentless in her pursuit of this outcome, refusing to even entertain the idea of her grandchild being born out of wedlock. When I found out that Mason and Lila were actually going to get married and had started sending out wedding invitations to our relatives, I was left furious and humiliated. Without arguing further, I just kept my word and cut my mother and brother off from my life. However, my mom doesn't give up easily. For weeks after the fallout, she'd called incessantly, left voicemails, and even shown up at my doorstep uninvited, trying to guilt me into reconciliation. It was suffocating. That's when I knew the only way to escape her was to leave the city entirely. 3 years have passed since I uprooted my life and moved to a new city, cutting ties with almost everyone in my family except for my dad. He respected my decision to move away and understood why I needed the distance, though it saddened him that I no longer visited. In these 3 years, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I didn't share my new number with anyone except my dad. I made new friends, found a sense of normalcy again, and worked hard to leave the past behind. So, imagine my shock when I found Lila on my doorstep yesterday, ringing my doorbell. When I opened my door, I almost didn't recognize her at first. Lila looked nothing like the woman I had once loved. Her clothes were shabby and worn, her face pale and gaunt, and her hair looked thin and unkempt. She stood there clutching the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old. The child had Mason's sharp features, an unmistakable resemblance that he was her father. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. My mind raced with questions. Why was she here? How did she find me? What did she want? The years I had spent trying to forget her and the pain she had caused seemed to collapse in an instant. Finally, I broke the silence. Lila? What are you doing here? Her eyes welled with tears, and her voice was shaky as she asked if she could come in as she had something important to discuss with me. My initial instinct was to say no, to send them away. But then I glanced at the little girl by her side. She was staring up at me with these innocent, wide eyes. I couldn't bring myself to be rude in front of the child, so I stepped aside and motioned for them to come in. I showed them to the couch and offered them water. Once they were settled, I sat across from them and asked them what they were doing here. I already knew she wouldn't have found me on her own. I hadn't given my address to anyone except my dad, and I trusted him to keep it a secret unless something truly important came up. So what was it that was so important for him to give up my location to her? Instead of answering immediately, Lila reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to me without a word. I opened it and immediately recognized my mom's handwriting. My stomach churned as I read the contents of the letter. My mom had written, in no uncertain terms, that it was my responsibility to fix the mess Mason had created. She laid out how Lila and Jesse were struggling, how Mason had left them, And how, as Mason's brother and Jesse's uncle, I should step up and take care of them now. I looked up at Lila, confused and angry. What is this supposed to mean? I asked, holding up the letter. That's when Lila broke down and began telling me the full story. According to her, Mason had always been unfaithful in their marriage from the very beginning. Even after Lila gave birth to their daughter, Jesse, my brother continued to have affairs on and off throughout their time together. Lila, for her part, had tried to make things work, hoping that things would get better over time for Jesse's sake if nothing else. But 3 months ago, Mason had abruptly packed up and left. No explanation, no note, no warning. He just disappeared. Since then, Lila had been on her own. She had no job, no savings, and no home. She and Mason had lived in a rented place, and without him, she couldn't afford to stay. My mom, feeling some sense of obligation because of Jesse, had been giving Lila money to support them. But now, with Mason pretty much gone for good, my mom had decided she no longer wanted to be responsible for Lila and her child. Lila then went on to tell me that my mother wanted me to take care of Lila and Jesse since they had nowhere to go and no one else to turn to. I was completely repulsed by what she was asking and how ridiculous it was for both her and my mom to expect that I would help. My mom had not only sided with Mason during the initial betrayal but was now attempting to dump the consequences of his actions onto me. It was infuriating, but it wasn't surprising. My mother's relentless favoritism toward Mason had always blinded her to the damage he had caused. I immediately told Lila, quite bluntly and in front of her child, that she had no right to expect any help from me. I mean, this wasn't my child, she wasn't my fiancée anymore, and this was clearly not my responsibility. Although I did feel bad that Mason had just left her, she should have seen this coming. After all, he isn't the most reliable or trustworthy person. Anyway, I wasn't going to be guilted into helping, so I asked Lila to leave. Heaven this, she started to cry, saying she had nowhere to go, no money, and that whatever she had left she had spent it on gas to come see me. I ended up giving her a few $100 before asking her to leave. Since then, although I know what I did was right, I can't help but also feel a bit guilty. I feel sorry for that poor child. So, Ida here? Update 1. Okay, so I would like to clarify a few things. My mom's behavior in this situation is completely baffling to me as well. The fact that she's trying to guilt me into helping Lila and her child after everything that's happened feels incredibly selfish. I get that she might feel obligated because of her grandchild, but she shouldn't expect me to clean up after her son's mess. Especially after how she completely disregarded my feelings and sided with Mason during the whole betrayal, her request just feels even more out of line. I agree with some of your comments that my dad betrayed me also. Instead of offering the support I needed after the affair, he took a neutral stance. Although he did scold my brother that one time, he never really sided with me completely. By not challenging my mom's manipulative behavior, he also played a part in this betrayal. I plan on having a talk with him soon. Lila may have been left by Mason, but that doesn't automatically put the responsibility on me to take care of her. She made choices, and even though I can feel some sympathy for her, given the circumstances, I don't owe her anything. The fact that she showed up on my doorstep with nothing to offer but a sob story and a child only highlights her desperation. What I did telling Lila to leave, giving her money, but not offering to take on more responsibility was an act of setting boundaries. I didn't shun her out of spite, I simply made it clear that it's not my job to fix what Mason broke. I'm not obligated to take care of her just because she's in a tough spot now. No, that child is definitely not mine. Lila and I had already broken up weeks before she got pregnant, and by the time we ended things, we had stopped being intimate for quite some time. The timeline is clear, and there is absolutely no possibility that I'm the father. Moreover, Jessie has all of Mason's features. Her face, her eyes, her smile, it's like looking at him as a child. There's no doubt in my mind that Mason is her father. I don't need to get a paternity test done because the resemblance is unmistakable. The child is undoubtedly his, and I'm not going to be dragged into any more confusion. No, I do not want to adopt my niece. I can't believe some of you are even suggesting this. Regardless of Lila's financial or emotional situation, she is the mother, and it's her responsibility. I don't understand why she never worked after her marriage or why she didn't save up. Mason is the father, so even if they break up, both Lila and Mason need to step up and take care of their child. Mason has no option but to pay child support. Update 2. I talked with my parents about everything. I already knew that my dad had given Lila my address, but I wanted to hear it from him directly. I called him and asked point blank why he agreed to share my location with her after I had repeatedly asked him not to do so and what he expected me to do for Lila and her child after all these years. My dad was quiet for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. Then, He sighed deeply and apologized. "I'm sorry, son. I really am," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "We've tried everything we could to help Lila. But with Mason gone for so long, we could only do so much. Your mom begged me to give her your address. She said that maybe if you saw her after all this time, you'd want to help her out in some way since she has nowhere else to go." I could feel my frustration rising and asked him why he thought I would ever help someone like her. "She betrayed me with Mason. She hurt me. And now you want me to help her?" I asked him. My dad told me he understood why I was upset. He explained that neither he nor my mom wanted things to turn out this way, but Lila and Jesse were family, too. He believed that I was their only option. He apologized to me, but I didn't listen. I told him that he and I were done. I had trusted him to be different than my mom, but it turns out that they are all the same backstabbing traitors. Did they really think I was going to somehow forget the past and welcome Lila and my brother's child into my life and start taking care of them? Wow, my parents really did not care about me. I told my dad, firmly and without hesitation, that he should lose my number and forget I ever existed to him. Since he knew my address, I warned him that if either he or my mom ever showed up at my place, I would call the police. My dad attempted to apologize again, pleading for me to listen, but I wasn't interested anymore. My voice didn't falter as I spoke, but the weight of the words hung heavy in the air. "Don't call me again," I said, cutting him off. "Just don't. You made your choices, and I'm making mine." Without waiting for him to respond, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. What my dad has done is unforgivable and there is no going back from this. Update 3, it's been almost a month since my last update. I was finally able to track down Mason with the help of one of my buddies. Turns out, Lila was right. Mason has been living with his latest fling a few towns away from home, pretending like he has no responsibilities as if he has no family. I can't believe that this was the same guy who had told me, with a straight face, that he was in love with Lila 3 years ago, the same guy who had turned my life upside down. And now, after all of that, he was living with someone else, pretending as if he hadn't just abandoned his wife and child. It was infuriating, maddening even. How could someone be so selfish, so cold? The fact that he could be so casual about it, like abandoning his own flesh and blood was just a minor inconvenience, made me sick. After I found out where he was, I forwarded his address to Lila. I didn't want to get involved in any more of her drama, but I didn't want her to feel completely helpless either. So, I gave her one last piece of advice: you need to hire a lawyer and file for divorce and child support. Do it right now, before Mason disappears somewhere else. I also sent her some money, just enough to get her by. Lila thanked me for everything, and I could hear the relief in her voice. She apologized again, as she had already done so many times before. But I wasn't interested in hearing it anymore. "I'm done," I texted her. "Don't ever contact me again. Don't show up at my door. This is the last thing I'm doing for you. What we had, whatever it was long gone. I just wanted her to not disturb my peace again."